It's 1023 in the morning, April 26, 1986. A small Soviet city called Pripyat is asleep. In less than a minute, the world will change forever. 40 years ago this week, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant tore itself apart, and 600,000 people were sent to clean up what shouldn't have been survivable. They were called the Liquidators. This is their story, finally being told. Picture a fire you can't see, smoke you can't smell, heat that doesn't burn, until weeks later, when your skin starts falling off. That's radiation, and on that April night more of it escaped from a single building than the Hiroshima bomb released, by a factor of 400. The first firefighters who arrived had no idea what they were walking into. The radiation meters? Frozen at the highest reading. They charged in anyway. Many of them absorbed doses that would kill them within days. To understand what happened at Chernobyl, you need to understand what the Soviet Union was in 1986, a superpower running on secrets. The RBMK reactor design, the type used at Chernobyl, had known flaws. Soviet officials knew about them. They classified that information. The operators running the safety test that night had incomplete manuals, critical warnings had been redacted. They were flying blind in the dark. At 1:23 a.m., during a routine test that went catastrophically wrong, the reactor's power output spiked to 100 times its normal level. In 4 seconds, the explosion blew the 2,000-ton reactor lid straight through the roof. The graphite core, the heart of the reactor, was now exposed to the open air. And graphite, when it's been irradiated and then exposed to air, it burns. It burned for 10 days. The town of Pripyat sat just 3 kilometers away. Population, 45,000. They weren't evacuated for 36 hours. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev didn't make a public statement for 18 days. By then, radioactive clouds had drifted across half of Europe. By May 14th, 116,000 people had been relocated from a 30-kilometer exclusion zone. Many never went home again. But evacuation was only the beginning. Someone had to go back in. Someone had to stop the reactor from doing something even worse. Here's the nightmare scenario Soviet scientists faced. The melting reactor core could burn through the floor. Below it sat a massive pool of water used for emergency cooling. If that molten core, called the corium, hit that water, a steam explosion that could have rendered much of Europe uninhabitable. 3 plant workers volunteered to wade into radioactive water in pitch darkness to open the drainage valves. They knew what it meant. Alexei Onanenko, Valery Bezpalov, Boris Baranov. Remember those names. They drained the tanks. The steam explosion never happened. But the danger wasn't over. The molten core could still burn down into the earth, contaminating the groundwater for half a continent. They needed to build a barrier underneath the reactor. Soviet officials summoned coal miners from across the country, 400 of them. They were ordered to dig a tunnel beneath Reactor 4. Underground, temperatures reached 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 Fahrenheit. They worked naked to survive the heat while radiation cooked them from above. They completed the tunnel in just 33 days. The concrete platform they built beneath the reactor was never actually needed, but they didn't know that when they were digging. And then there was the roof. The explosion had scattered chunks of radioactive graphite across the building. Someone had to remove them. The graphite was so radioactive the robots sent to clear it simply stopped working. Their circuits fried from the radiation, so the Soviets sent soldiers instead. They called them biorobots. Each man had 90 seconds on the roof, long enough to shovel 1 or 2 pieces of graphite into the ruined reactor. 90 seconds. That was the difference between a survivable dose and a death sentence. Stopwatches determined whether these men would live to see their children grow up. 3,400 soldiers rotated through that roof, 90 seconds at a time, for months. The liquidators weren't just soldiers and miners. They were scientists, engineers, drivers, cooks, helicopter pilots who flew directly over the open reactor to dump sand and boron. The first pilots who flew those missions received so much radiation that their flight logs were later classified as nuclear waste. In total, 600,000 people received official liquidator status, 600,000 certificates acknowledging their service in the exclusion zone. The official Soviet death toll? 31. That's the number that went into the international record. 31. Independent researchers estimate the true number of deaths from Chernobyl radiation will eventually reach somewhere between 4,000 and 93,000. The uncertainty is part of the tragedy. And this is where the story gets personal, because among the 600,000 was one man whose voice would eventually crack the wall of Soviet silence. Valery Legasov was the chief scientist sent to manage the Chernobyl response. He was brilliant, respected, and at first, a loyal Soviet official. In August 1986, Legasov presented the Soviet report on Chernobyl to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. He told them most of the truth, not all of it. He couldn't tell them everything: the systemic failures, the design flaws that had been classified, the warnings that were ignored. Back home, the KGB was watching. After Vienna, Legasov became increasingly isolated. His proposals for nuclear safety reforms were blocked. His colleagues distanced themselves. The system that created Chernobyl was protecting itself. So Legasov did something extraordinary. He recorded his testimony on audio tapes. Hours of detailed accounts, what really happened and what the Soviet system refused to acknowledge. On April 27, 1988, exactly 2 years after the explosion, Valery Legasov hanged himself in his Moscow apartment. He was 51 years old. His tapes survived. They were smuggled out and eventually published. They became the foundation for everything we now know about what the Soviet Union tried to hide. What is the cost of lies? That question, from the HBO series that dramatized Legasov's story, captures something essential about Chernobyl. The lies didn't cause the explosion, but they made everything worse. Delayed evacuations, suppressed health data. Families who didn't know their fathers and husbands were dying until it was too late. Now, 40 years later, new voices are emerging. A CNN documentary series debuting in March 2026 features survivors speaking publicly for the first time. The filmmakers gained access to rare CIA and Soviet documents that have never been seen before. After 4 decades, the full story is finally being assembled. But even as we learn more about 1986, Chernobyl's shadow extends into the present. The exclusion zone sits in what is now a war zone. In February 2025, a drone strike damaged the new safe confinement, the protective structure built over the ruined reactor. The invisible fire isn't fully contained, even now. So what do the liquidators teach us? What does their sacrifice mean for a world that still relies on nuclear power? If this history resonates with you, consider reading Adam Higginbotham's Midnight in Chernobyl. It's the most comprehensive English-language account of the disaster and its aftermath. The CNN documentary, Disaster: The Chernobyl Meltdown, premieres in March. For the first time, survivors who've never spoken publicly will share their stories. Organizations like Chernobyl Children International continue providing medical support to communities still affected by the disaster. 40 years later, children are still being born with radiation-linked conditions. And if you're interested in the ongoing debate about nuclear energy, its risks, its potential, its place in addressing climate change, the Chernobyl story offers essential context. Not as a simple warning against nuclear power. Many experts consider it crucial for decarbonization, but as a reminder of what happens when institutions prioritize secrecy over safety. If stories like this matter to you, the hidden histories, the human choices behind the headlines, hit subscribe. We dig into the past every week, and a like helps more people find us. 600,000 people. Soldiers, miners, scientists, pilots, ordinary citizens conscripted into an extraordinary mission. Some were heroes by choice. Others were simply following orders. Many didn't understand what they were being asked to do until their bodies started failing them. The first responders, the firefighters who arrived within minutes of the explosion, received doses up to 20,000 milligray. To put that in perspective, 5,000 is typically lethal. Vasily Ignatenko was one of them. 25 years old. He died in a Moscow hospital 2 weeks after the explosion. His pregnant wife Ludmila stayed by his side until the end. She described watching her husband's body deteriorate from the inside out, skin peeling away, internal organs failing. Radiation doesn't just kill you, it unmakes you. And yet, 600,000 people still went, even after the story started spreading. Even after they started to understand what radiation really meant. Some went because they believed in duty. Some went because they had no choice. Some went because the alternative, a contaminated Europe, was unthinkable. The Soviet Union didn't call them heroes at the time, not publicly. That would have meant admitting the scale of the disaster. They were simply workers doing their jobs. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the truth began to emerge, slowly, painfully, document by classified document. The liquidators who survived found their health problems dismissed, their compensation denied, their stories questioned. The system that had used them didn't want to acknowledge what it had done to them. But they organized. They told their stories. They forced the world to listen. And now, 40 years later, a new generation is finally hearing them. Chernobyl at 40. The invisible fire still burns, contained now beneath steel and concrete, but never truly extinguished. 600,000 people walked into that fire. They absorbed doses that would slowly kill many of them. And they did it so the rest of us wouldn't have to. The liquidators. Remember that word. Remember their names. Remember what they did. Because their story, finally being told, isn't just history. It's a warning. And it's a testament to what ordinary people can do when the impossible becomes necessary.